I'm going to talk to you about a piece of research that was conducted by the Centre for Regeneration Excellence Wales, where I worked for the last 4.5 years until the end of July and since retired. We were concerned to tackle some very major issues that are experienced throughout Wales and to very much think outside the box, to really look at this in an innovative and different way. And the result is a report that you can download from the Career website. It's been very well received to date. A number of ministers are beginning to take some of the recommendations forward. It was a study that was conducted in Tredegar, but Tredegar as an exemplar. So although it's about Tredegar, it's not limited in its implications to Tredegar. It can be applied in any community in Wales, indeed in UK or anywhere else. We were concerned with two major policy challenges. The first one is poverty eradication. We had an insight from Torfaen a little earlier about the severity and depth of poverty in some of our communities in Wales. The little statistic on the side there in the circle, I think is an absolute damning statistic for any modern rich society such as the UK. In Wales, 1/3 of our children live in poverty. That is a failure. It's a collective failure, and it's one that we have tried very hard to address in Wales, but we continue to fail. So we felt, how can we rethink this process? How can we look at what we do and try something different? The other issue is sustainability. We have a society that Wales already consumes 2 planet worths of resources every year. So it isn't the case that we can solve that problem of poverty simply by making more wealth, by somehow creating more surplus, because we would then use more than our current 2 planets worth of resources. So we felt we have to tackle those 2 problems alongside each other. They're very much part of the same problem. And we felt that to do this would be so radical a change that it would need a new settlement, very similar to the one that we had after the Second World War, which radically transformed the nature of welfare, the nature of the economy, and brought a new settlement to the way that we organise society. So quite a major challenge. We asked a very simple question: what type of economy and society do we need to create or to achieve economic, social, cultural and environmental sustainability by 2030? We felt this was a long-term plan. You can't flick a switch and these things happen overnight. You've really got to work at it, and it's got to be consistent and sustained over an extended period. Poverty in Wales has developed over the last 35 years. I grew up in Wales with a child poverty rate of 7%. Reaching 33% has taken 35 years. It may well take 35 years to reverse it. So 2030 was our notional target. We had to inform ourselves with some wider thinking. We looked at transition theory. Some of you may work and be councillors in transition towns. Transition theory simply tells us that we are consuming the planet too fast, that we are going to run into a brick wall of oil shortages, energy shortages, food security problems, probably around about 2030 when this will become utterly critical. Transition theory says, let's start the transition now. Let's start doing something differently now so that we are really preparing ourselves for those very difficult circumstances that are inevitably on the horizon. We also looked at local authority practice and public service reform practice and the total place approach, which tries to see a locality as a unity, not as an educational problem or a health problem or a transport problem, but how all those things interact. So can we tackle the major health challenges we have in Wales through better education in our schools around things like diet, smoking, alcohol abuse? These are critical ways of connecting the policy agendas, and our report is full of those types of connections. We also looked at something a little bit more radical called the foundational economy. It's a fairly simple concept, Every day when we wake up, we need certain things. We need food, we need energy, we need housing, we will need healthcare, we need education, we need transport, we need telecommunications. These things are absolutely fundamental. Every community requires them, every individual requires them, every household requires them. This, in many ways, is the real economy. About 40% of the population is employed in it, and about 30% of household expenditure is spent on it. If you look at the political framing of our economy, the way politicians think about the economy, they talk about aerospace, they talk about information and communication technology, they talk about the motor trades, they talk about an economy that's international and global. The foundational economy is the local economy. It's the one that we're all engaged with every day. And the two kind of look like that. They interact. On the left-hand side there, you have the large blue external economy with its imports and exports. Wales has to do well in that, but doesn't currently do very well. We have about 75% of English or UK GDP. If you go to areas like Blaen y Gwent, that comes down to 57%. We do not perform well in that economy. On the right-hand side, we have the local economy, where things are traded locally with local businesses. About 70% of people in Wales work for businesses that employ less than 10 people. You would not think so from our political priorities, which are about big inward investment, large infrastructural programmes. The first £1 billion that the Welsh Government will borrow will be spent on an M4 extension around Newport. It will have no economic impact on the rest of Wales. This is the way we frame the economy currently. We're talking about changing it to a local perception. Where might that economy be developed? The key argument comes from Professor Carol Williams. He's at the Manchester Business School, internationally recognised. He says the mundane things that we need every day can be developed in the local economy. He does a wonderful case study of bacon. Not the usual thing academics get grossly interested in, but he looks at bacon and he's managed to really demonstrate that as little as 10 years ago, we were about 80% self-sufficient in the production of bacon. We are now 50%. We get our bacon largely from Denmark and Holland, two of the highest wage economies in the world, and it has no local impact on our economy. And he uses that as an example to show that most of the things we do now have supply chains that reach intercontinentally. 100 years ago, we had supply chains that didn't reach to the next town. And he's not saying we can't do the big intercontinental stuff, but we also need the other stuff in parallel. We need some of the mundane things that we need every day to be produced where we need them. And this is also important, of course, for the long-term sustainability argument. We will not be flying spring onions from Brazil in 20 years' time so that you can have them on Christmas Day. We will not have strawberries in December because we will not be able to afford the transport and the energy costs in producing them. So this is coming anyway, so we must relocalise food production particularly. It has massive opportunity for local employment, particularly in agriculture. Some of you will represent rural communities. Our politicians have spent the last 20 years telling our farmers, do anything but don't produce food. You can be stewards of the landscape, you can get into diversified tourism and heritage activities, but please don't produce any food if you can possibly avoid it. That's a bit of a caricature, but that's largely the way European and UK policy on agriculture has gone in the last 25 years. We're talking about a revitalisation of not just rural food production, but urban food production, growing it on every possible bit of space that you can imagine. And we've worked with State University of New York to develop some ideas around technology that they're currently employing to produce very large-scale greenhouses and to heat them for free. I will explain that over lunch if anyone's interested. We also looked at the massive potential local employment in energy conservation and energy generation. We looked at Germany, the German energy Wende system. Germany has gone through a revolution in the way it produces its energy. It is now largely characterized outside of the big cities by local, often off-grid provision. They have local heating schemes, they have local renewable schemes. These are not just wind, these are biomass, biogas, community hydro. Every village has a diverse range of energy supply technologies. So you might have a wind farm, a very small wind farm on a local hill. You will supplement it with biomass from local forest. You will supplement it from biogas, from methane digestion, from farm effluent. It will have a diversity. Characteristically, it will be owned by the community council, or by some of the farmers will set up their own initiatives, but it will feed into a local supply grid. 380,000 jobs created, and this has happened. It isn't a prospective, it's actually happened. We can see no reason why that can't happen in Wales, other than the fact that all the authorities in Wales who should facilitate this actually block it. And anyone who's had any attempt at a community renewable program or project will know that your biggest obstacle is Natural Resources Wales. And, NRW should be what it says it is about releasing natural resources for community use and enabling that to happen. And we've made recommendations to Welsh Government as to how that can be changed. Energy conservation, massive. We've had the RBED programme in Wales, which demonstrated that you can retrofit low-carbon equipment to even very old houses and make them almost carbon neutral. It costs to do that, but the long-term savings, particularly in fuel poverty and fuel costs, can be enormous. The bonus is that to do it, you can employ large numbers of people. The New Economics Foundation did a report about 7 years ago now called the Green New Deal. They created an army of a vision of what they called an army of green workers crawling over every house in the UK. It's a nice image, I think. It's insulation, photovoltaics, I can never remember that term, photovoltaics on the roof, ground source, air source, heat pumps, a whole range of things. We can make every house practically its own power station. And feed surplus into the grid. So massive potential there. We looked at the care sector. We have a wonderful model of care in the UK, and as my beard's getting greyer and I'm getting closer to needing that care, I get more worried about it. It's a wonderful model where the local authority does the assessment and then largely employs a private sector company to provide you with that care. It's of appalling quality. It gives appalling employment conditions to those who work in the industry, and no one wins, other than the very large, often multinational companies who get the big contracts and screw every cost to the floor in order to maximize profit for their shareholders. We looked at Quebec, Bologna, where 80% of care is provided by local cooperatives. Local people, caring for local people, highly trained, well paid. It's a different model. Welsh Government's very interested in it. They've set up their own research programme. Wales Cooperative Centre's looking at it. It would be a different way of organising something that is going to be massively important, as Nick Bennett said this morning, with that rising curve of population over 80. It's going to be absolutely fundamental that we have a decent care service, but one that could provide local employment on decent terms. We also looked at internet-based trading, employment in remote areas, but working for large organisations. The model there was a project I visited in deepest rural Galway over 10 years ago, but the parish council gave over the village hall to be an IT centre, and there were 10 people working for Microsoft in that IT centre, earning Dublin wages. We have not done this in Wales to any great extent. We still have appalling broadband coverage despite the assumed rollout. So massive potential there. I will be as quick as I can. Major challenges to get to this place. Health. Tredegar, the community we looked at, the well life expectancy, that's how long you will live before you get a life-limiting illness, is 20 years less than a 25-minute drive away to Abergavenny. It's that fundamental a difference. We have to address that. And that's about the health service looking at things differently, but fundamentally it's about the community looking at things differently. And leadership at the local level in terms of changing the behaviours that create those health problems. We looked at education. We felt that schools are remote, parents are not engaged, and we proposed the idea of an educational trust in each locality, of which community and town councils would be major components, looking at the way that we create a culture of learning at the local level. We looked at housing, we looked at transport, big infrastructural stuff, always difficult to resolve. The housing crisis in the UK is the worst it's been probably for 40 years. Undersupply, lack of affordable housing, the private sector market almost closed off to first-time buyers. We need greater supply, basically. And again, there's massive job potential in creating that supply. Coming to some of the fundamentals, how do you change that pattern that we've currently got to allow this to happen? And we said we need a different pattern of governance. And it's got to be a spatial relationship which starts at the community level, has a regional structure and a national structure. So some of the changes have to happen in the community. Communities have to get themselves energized to do some of these things. We have to have leadership at the local level to make some of these things happen. But it's no good communities getting engaged if all they meet is a wall of bureaucracy at the next level. There has to be fundamental easing of the restrictions and the red tape that makes community processes so difficult currently. We also have to see flows of money down to that level and flows of responsibility down to that level. Excellent presentation on asset transfer. Asset transfer has to also involve resource transfer. This is a very difficult climate for us to discuss these things in when the next tier up is getting such severe cuts. But somewhere, if responsibility transfers, we have to have transfer of resources. And we would, in the report, very much advocate a total place approach. Thinking of a community as an entity, as an entirety, not as separate elements of a kind of a divided, siloed challenge. The link between education, health, transport, housing. We've got to explore them at the local level. We've got to understand how they work, how they interact. If housing is poor, health tends to get poor results. If education is poor, further down the line we get poor health. All these things are closely interrelated, and planning services in an integrated way helps us meet that challenge. And so to the role of town and community councils. I speak as an ex-community councillor. I did 4 years in my local community. I think town and community councils can provide the local leadership that's necessary. I don't think they can do it on their own. They have to work in partnership. We talk about a coalition in our report between the third sector, between town and community councils, and between particularly the unitary local authority. This will become more important if the Williams Review does create super local authorities, and the role of that local leadership will become critical. Town and community councils can initiate projects. Don't wait for somebody else to do it. Do it. Community energy, local care services, why not? It's all there for the taking. And I think the key thing for me is don't wait for external funding. See how it can be done internally through developing income streams, developing public subscription models, local trusts, a whole range of approaches that can be adopted there. Community interest companies, trade, sell things, do things, become commercial but with a social purpose behind it. Project management, I think that leadership, project initiation can also become long-term project management. Fundamentally, it's about community mobilisation. I don't think your community and town council can do things on their own. They need the community behind them. They need the culture change that enables that to happen. But they can be a very powerful force for that change. And one that I think that everyone consistently underestimates, including town and community councils themselves. Okay, thank you.